yet so as by fire at the judgment seat of Christ. So either way, if you mock this truth, God will deal with you. Verse 32. And others said, we will hear thee again of this matter. There's the other people. You're going to run into some people. Very seldom you do when you share the grace message. That's the wonderful thing. That's why you endure. 99% of the people are going to probably reject it. But every once in a while, you run into somebody as you share the rightly divided word. They have never heard it, but you share it, and they say, I see that. And that's what's happening here. They will hear thee again in this matter. Verse 33. So Paul departed from among them. So Paul leaves. Howbeit, certain men clave unto him. You see that? And did what? They believed him. Now, when it said they clave, they followed Paul. They became his disciples. He gave them the gospel of grace. They trusted Christ, became members of the body, and they began to minister to Paul. You see some parallels between the Apostle Paul and the Lord. People would believe on the Lord in Israel, and then they start following him. They clave to him. That becomes one. And that's what Paul did. They followed him and listened to his words and got edified in the grace message. Look what he says in verse 34. Among which was Dionysius, the Areopagite. So this guy, Dionysius, he's an Areopagite. I like to tell you what the names, when I look at the book of Acts especially, these names are very important. Every name in the Bible means something. This name, Dionysius, it's the name of a Greek god for wine and intoxication. He's known to the Romans also as Bacchus. You heard of that, Bacchus? How do you say that? Bacchus, yeah. My mouth. And as I look at that, and that's a Gentile, I look at that and I say, interesting, wine and intoxication, that Greek god. Wine, the Bible talks about the Gentiles are under the wine of her fornication. Mystery Babylon the Great. Wine is something that can take over you. Paul says, be not drunk with wine where it is excess, but be filled with the Spirit. Wine can take you over. And the Antichrist system of religion, Babylon, so the people over here can see, that's the mother of harlots. It started back there in Genesis chapter 11, okay? Genesis 11. So Babylon's the mother of harlot. But all the religious systems that aren't of the Lord are the harlots. Babylon is the mother of it. And all in the book of Revelation says all the kings of the earth and the religious people on the earth, the lost people of the earth, are drunk with the wine of her fornication. And that's the Gentile way. The Gentiles are in the spiritual darkness worshiping all these idols, and it takes the Apostle Paul to get them out of that idolatry. And then this woman in verse 34, and a woman named Damaris and others with them. Damaris, the Greek word, it means a heifer or a female calf. And what it is, calves in the Bible represent idol worshiping. And again, idol worshiping Gentiles. One was the male and one was the female. And Gentiles worship all these idols. And it takes the gospel of grace preached by Paul and us, the clear gospel, to clear out that idolatry. Look at Acts chapter 18. Let's read that chapter. After these things, Paul departed from Athens and came to Corinth, and found a certain Jew named Aquila, born in Pontus, lately come from Italy with his wife Priscilla. I want to focus on them in a minute, especially you couples, if you're a husband and wife in the Lord. Because that Claudius had commanded all Jews to depart from Rome, and came unto them. And because he was of the same craft, he abode with them and wrought, for by their occupation they were tent makers. And he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath, and persuaded the Jews and the Greeks. And when Silas and Timotheus were come from Macedonia, Paul was pressed in the spirit and testified to the Jews that Jesus was Christ. And when they opposed themselves and blasphemed, he shook his raiment and said unto them, your blood be upon your own heads. I am clean. From henceforth I will go unto the Gentiles. And he departed thence and entered into a certain man's house named Justus, one that worshipped God, whose house joined hard to the synagogue. And Crispus, the chief ruler of the synagogue, believed on the Lord with all his house, and many of the Corinthians hearing believed and were baptized. Then spake the Lord to Paul in the night by a vision. Be not afraid, but speak, and hold not thy peace. For I am with thee, and no man shall set on thee to hurt thee. For I have much people in this city. And he continued there 1 year and 6 months, teaching the word of God among them. And when Gallio was the deputy of Achaia, the Jews made insurrection with one accord against Paul, and brought him to the judgment seat. saying, "This fellow persuadeth men to worship God contrary to the law." And when Paul was now about to open his mouth, Gallio said unto the Jews, "If it were a matter of wrong and wicked lewdness, O ye Jews, reason would I should bear with you. But if it be a question of words and names and of your law, look ye to it, for I will be no judge in such matters." And he drave them from the judgment seat. Then all the Greeks took Sosthenes, the chief ruler of the synagogue, and beat him before the judgment seat. And Gallio cared for none of those things. And Paul, after this, tarried there yet a good while, and then took his leave of the brethren, and sailed thence into Syria, and with him Priscilla and Aquila, having shorn his head in Cenchrea, for he had a vow. And he came to Ephesus and left them there, but he himself entered into the synagogue and reasoned with the Jews. When they desired him to tarry long time with them, he consented not, but bade them farewell, saying, "I must by all means keep this feast that cometh in Jerusalem. But I will return again unto you, if God will." And he sailed from Ephesus. And when he had landed at Caesarea and gone up and saluted the church, he went down to Antioch. And after he had spent some time there, he departed and went over all the country of Galatia and Phrygia in order, strengthening all the disciples. And a certain Jew named Apollos, born at Alexandria, an eloquent man and mighty in the scriptures, came to Ephesus. This man was instructed in the way of the Lord, and being fervent in the Spirit, he spake and taught diligently the things of the Lord, knowing only the baptism of John. And he began to speak boldly in the synagogue, whom when Aquila and Priscilla had heard, they took him unto them and expounded unto him the way of God more perfectly. And when he was disposed to pass into Achaia, the brethren wrote, exhorting the disciples to receive him, who when he was come helped them much which had believed through grace. For he mightily convinced the Jews, and that publicly, showing by the scriptures that Jesus was Christ. Now we're in chapter 18 as Paul continues on his journeys. If you can see, he now comes to Athens and Corinth. We've been seeing the apostle. He's making his way across. He was in Philippi, Acts 16. Acts 17, he's in Thessalonica, Berea. There's some Gentiles down here, so he makes his way through Achaia. Here's Athens, Achaia, Corinth, and then he's going to make his way over, okay? So we're watching him go west, out past Jerusalem, out to the Gentiles, far hence. That's what he says. He's going to say he's going to go far hence to the Gentiles. We'll see that. Acts chapter 18, look at verse 1. After these things, so after Paul's there with all those guys there, Mars Hill and all that, he's continuing on his journeys. Verse 1, and after these things, Paul departed from Athens and came to Corinth. So now he's going to he goes west over to Corinth, right there at the bottom peninsula there. Now, verse 2, here's what I want you to see. And found a certain Jew. Now, the book of Acts is written to the Jews. Everything in Acts is Jewish. If you want to understand what Paul has to say about these things, read his Gentile epistles, Romans through Philemon. But right now, we're just looking at the history of it. He found a certain Jew named Aquila, born in Pontus, lately come from Italy with his wife Priscilla. So they're over here. He was born in Pontus, but they're over here in Italy. They're doing business over here, okay? And they have a church there as well. We'll see that. Verse 2. Lately come from Italy with his wife Priscilla. Now, why did they have to leave Italy? Because that Claudius was one of the Roman leaders, had commanded all Jews to depart from Rome. Now, I'm going to give you what I see there. If the Jews became too much, the Jewish people were in dispersion, yet amongst the Gentiles. In other words, they weren't in the land, all of them. They're supposed to be in the land, but because they broke the law, God had dispersed them among the Gentiles under the law.